پارلمان انگلستان، مجلس اعیان. کنفرانس ضرورت پاسخگویی بین المللی برای توقف اعدامها در ایران. سخنرانیهای اعضای مجلس اعیان، لورد کریر، لورد استیو مککیب، بارونس ردفرن، لورد کارلای، اندی دونالد، نماینده پارلمان انگلستان از حزب کارگر.
اندی دونالد: عاملان اعدامها و شکنجه ها در ایران باید مورد حسابرسی قرار بگیرند. دادگاه کیفری بین المللی می تواند صلاحیت خود را نسبت به افرادی که چنین جنایات وحشیانه‌ای مرتکب می شوند اعمال کند. من از شجاعت کسانی که زندانی اند و حاضر نیستند در برابر ستمگران سرخم کنند شگفت زده‌ام. این شگفت‌انگیزترین جلوه انسانیت است که افرادی حاضرند به پای چوبه دار بروند اما از باورهای خود دست نکشند.
Many thanks for the invitation.
I don't want to say too much, but I'm here to just express my solidarity with the position expressed. And many thanks for the position paper. It was incredibly informative. I think Bob's got it right. I don't think is that really too much to ask that we have a call for an end to executions. I mean, reading those details of this barbaric execution of people for expressing a difference of opinion is just an anathema. So I find myself in agreement with Bob almost entirely. I think where we also share a view is that we welcome a secular society in place of this. I think there's got to be a recognition in this country that that's the aching desire of the majority of the people in Iran. But I think we've got to try to change that. And the adherence to human rights, the appeal that is made so regularly in these discussions is the observance of basic human rights is surely something we can all completely agree with. But also the rule of international law, international humanitarian law. And the perpetrators of executions and tortures such as this, I entirely agree, have to be held to account. And we should be, in my opinion, having that discussion in this country about how the ICC can exercise its writ against people who are committing such barbaric crimes. So, Chair, I don't want to hold the meeting too much longer, but I wanted to come and express my solidarity. And I look at this as an issue about the Iranian people. And I don't think I particularly need to conflate and compare it with other issues. It's an inalienable right for people to live in peace without threat of being arrested and tortured. And I am just utterly amazed at the courage of people who are incarcerated, who refuse to kowtow to their oppressors. And it is just the most remarkable expression of humanity for people who are prepared to go to the gallows rather than be persuaded to recant their views. I am in awe of their courage, and I think people in such circumstances are deserving of universal support. They're making that appeal for universal human rights, and it's exactly what they deserve. Thank you, Chair.
لورد کریر: سپاه پاسداران و حامیانش در انگلستان و در جهان فعالیت می‌کنند و از نیروهای نیابتی شامل باندهای جنایتکار استفاده می‌کنند. وقت آن رسیده است که دولت انگلستان از خودش قاطعیت نشان بدهد و سپاه پاسداران را در لیست تروریستی بگذارد.
Thank you. Just won't be a minute. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me this evening. This is the first meeting like this that I've attended, but I've always supported the NCRI and the opposition to the regime in Tehran. I might be telling me auntie out to suck eggs when I say this, but I think we should be clear that the regime in Tehran are clerical fascists. And those people in this country, because there are a few, who defend that regime are apologists for fascism. I mean, it's a bit like defending the black shirts and the brown shirts in the 1930s. These are people who, as we've heard, slaughter their opponents on a regular basis, use terror in a way. In the past 3 years since the present uprising started in 2022, and as Madam Rajavi said, they use terror and execution in a far more systemic and systematic way than they ever had before from 1979 onwards. In my view, government after government after government, regardless of whether it's been Conservative or Labour, have been pretty ineffective when it comes to standing up to the clerical fascists who run Iran. And an example of that is this. You'll all be familiar with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Now, when we were in opposition before the last election, a number of us were raising the issue of prescribing the IRGC. Carried on saying, I've probably said it 3 or 4 times since I was sworn in as a member of the House of Lords. When are we going to ban the IRGC? When are we going to prescribe the IRGC? And the response I get is exactly the response I was getting from the previous government. It's terribly complicated. Now that tells me that you've got a culture at the Foreign Office of more or less do nothing, of saying leave it to clever chaps like us, who, by the way, never stand for election or anything like that, and they seem to sort of capture ministers, regardless of party, they seem to capture ministers who then parrot this line. And the excuse that I've heard is, well, if we ban the IRGC, we won't be able to get prisoners out of Iran. Well, we've not exactly had a good track record of doing that, have we? I mean, how many have we got out in the last few years? Very, 1 or 2, something like that. It's a weak excuse. It's more of making a statement. And the reason for making a statement is the IRGC and its supporters operate on Britain's streets, they operate across the globe. But in this country, they use proxies which include criminal gangs. They attack enemies of the Iranian state. They put out propaganda against what are perceived as enemies of the Iranian state. And it's about time a British government finally decided what its backbone was for and stood up to the Iranian regime and prescribed the IRGC. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
استیو مککیب. افزایش اعدامها در ایران با افزایش مقاومت در داخل ایران همزمان است. هرچه رفتار رژیم سخت‌تر باشد و اعدامهای بیشتری انجام دهد، رشد و اعتلاع مقاومت بیشتر و قوی‌تر می‌شود. بلکه به خواست مردم ایران و کانون‌های شورشی آنها سقوط خواهد کرد. سپاه پاسداران را ممنوع کنید و این مقاومت را به رسمیت بشناسید.
Madam Rajavi, friends, I was thinking the other day about my interest in Iran, which began around 1981 with the mass arrests of those objecting to the Islamization of the justice system and the eventual designation of the protesters as enemies of God. At that time, you might not believe this, but I played football on a Sunday morning with a group of Iranian students at Wolverhampton University. And I turned up one morning to discover they'd lost contact with their parents and relatives. Some were believed to be in arbitrary detention. Others had simply disappeared. So my starting point was a wish to help just a bunch of lads having a very difficult time. And inevitably, as I paid closer attention, I began to understand what was happening, and so developed an interest in and a concern for Iran, which continues to this day. And I've watched in horror as the regime has terrorised its own people, inflicted proxy wars in the region, and encouraged mass killings around the globe. As we heard earlier from Madam Rajavi, I think it's about nearly 1,500 people have been executed this year already. And there are genuine fears that this regime is gearing up for a repeat of the 1988 massacre, when around 30,000 political prisoners were murdered at the behest of the supreme leader. And as we heard earlier, one of the latest victims is Zara Tabari, who's been held in Lacan prison, and her crime was cooperating with the PMOI. Apparently her trial lasted 10 minutes. It was conducted on video, and she wasn't given access to a lawyer. So there you go. But as we've heard, this upsurge in executions actually coincides with increasing resistance inside Iran, and indeed the harsher the regime's behaviour and the more executions it carries out, the stronger the resistance grows. The people know it's falling apart with the economy collapsing around them, and alongside the terrible brutality, they can see the struggle for power and the jockeying for position around an ailing 86-year-old Khamenei. They are finished. It will collapse, not through external forces, but by the will of the Iranian people and their resistance units. It needs enemies and non-believers. Its twisted reasoning has caused wars and killings all over the region. Theirs is a doctrine of hatred designed to maximise repression and the sponsorship of terrorist atrocities around the world. That's why it's pointless for Western governments to fantasise about this regime's capacity to transition to some kind of moderate state. It's time the West recognised the futility of trying to negotiate with them. We're not being asked to supply weapons or fund resistance groups. We're being asked to recognise the legitimacy of the resistance and end the policy of appeasement. Let's look at the merits of Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan. Compare what she offers to the years of treachery and deceit derived from endless talking to the mullahs. And one other step, as many others have mentioned, is that Britain must prescribe the IRGC. This is an ugly, brutal, despotic theocracy with no respect for human rights and no respect for this country. So the time has come for action. Ban the IRGC, recognise the resistance, refer the regime to the Security Council, and demand comprehensive sanctions over its utterly intolerable record on human rights.
Thank you, Stephen.
بارونس ردفرن: من شاهد شجاعت این جنبش سازمان یافته بودم. تعهد آنان به حقوق بشر و برابری، به ویژه نقش رهبری زنان، منبع بزرگی از امید نه تنها برای ایرانیان، بلکه برای همه کسانی است که به آزادی و کرامت انسانی باور دارند. حمایت از این جنبش نه تنها یک وظیفه اخلاقی است، بلکه ضرورتی راهبردی برای صلح جهانی و امنیت اروپا به شمار می آید.
And can I say I'm very pleased to be here once again and stand with the Iranian people and their resistance, led by Miriam Rajavi, in their struggle for freedom, justice and a democratic republic. I've witnessed the courage of this movement, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, and the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. Their commitment to human rights and equality, especially the leadership role of women, has been a great source of hope, not only for Iranians, but for all who believe in liberty and dignity. Today, Iran faces two defining realities: a record number of executions and a glowing wave of dissident. The regime's answer to every demand for justice is hanging. It uses the death penalty not as a law, but as a weapon, an instrument to crush opposition and silence the cry for change. Since last year, more than 2,000 people have been executed. Amongst them, at least 60 women, young men, and political prisoners. In September alone, 200 executions took place, the highest number in nearly 4 decades. Behind each number lies a human life, a grieving family, and a nation bleeding for freedom. Also, a few weeks ago, 7 political prisoners, including 6 from Iran's Arab minority and 1 Kurdish prisoner, were executed after years of torture and solitary confinement. Their only crime was to demand freedom and dignity. And now 17 political prisoners, poets, athletes, students, and long-time activists are also facing imminent execution simply for supporting the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. Among them is Mohammad Javid Vafri Sani, a young boxer champion who has already spent 5 years under torture. The Supreme Court has just upheld his death sentence. Let us remember that behind this brutality lies fear, the regime's fear of its own people, because despite every execution, despite the prisons and the torture, Iranians continue to resist. Inside the country, resistant units linked to the NCRI are active in every single province. Organised protests, strikes and campaigns, such as the No to Execution Tuesdays, now in its 88th week. Mrs. Mariam Rajavi has said, with greater brutality, the regime seeks to prevent the uprising. But the determination of youth and the Iranian people to change the regime only hardens with each execution. Can I say I fully agree and do admire their bravery. Friends, supporting this movement is not only moral duty, it is a strategic necessity for global peace and European security. The same rulers who hang young Iranians in the streets are building missiles, funding terrorism, and undermining stability across the Middle East. And finally, I therefore say to my government and all democratic nations to adopt a firm and principled policy on Iran and to recognise the right of the Iranian people to resist tyranny and establish a democratic republic. And importantly, recognise the NCRI as a democratic alternative to this regime and support Mrs. Rouhani's 10-point plan. The day will come when Iran is free, and that day comes even closer. Thank you.
لورد کارلایل: اگر چیزی بوی پوسیدگی می‌دهد و مردم را می‌کشد فاسد است و این دقیقاً همان چیزی است که در ایران رخ می‌دهد. نه به این دلیل که در ایران مجرمان بسیاری وجود دارند، بلکه به این دلیل که خود حکومت متشکل از مجرمان است.
I'll start by saying a word directly to you, Madam Rajavi. It's a real pleasure to see you in this room, and I am convinced of your cogency and your wisdom, and I'm sure that not just on screen, but particularly in person, that cogency and wisdom will be translated into a surge in support for the NCRI and particularly, more generally, for the freedom of the Iranian people. Since I stopped being independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, I haven't been sitting idly by, and I've spent much of my professional life outside this building involved in geopolitical issues, particularly relating to the Gulf area and the Middle East. And I have a very clear picture of it. When one country is executing more people than the whole of the rest of the world added together, I don't think it needs a King's Council to tell you that there's something wrong. If it looks like rot and smells like rot and it's killing people, it's rot. And that is what is happening in Iran, and is not a result of there being large numbers of criminals in Iran. It's a result of the government being a bunch of criminals in Iran. And I think everybody, or almost everybody, outside Iran understands that. And I actually believe there's been a change of atmosphere from what I observe in the Gulf area. And people now are, it's not just the Israelis, it's not just the Americans, everybody in the region is now fed up with the Iranian mullahs who take charge of that government. And it's a very badly engineered system, because many of the officials you meet from Iran actually give me the impression, when one speaks to them very privately, about being totally opposed to what they're saying publicly. They don't want to be in the position of being the equivalent of Nazi war criminals when all this is over. I promise you they will be. These are people who will find themselves probably themselves being executed by the international community, or at least imprisoned for decade after decade because of what they have done. I sense from Iran that there is an increasing feeling of courage among ordinary people. I absolutely laud and lavish my praise on the women of Iran who have shown themselves I should have said who have shown yourselves to be the backbone of your society in the way in which quiet protest has been made, which has fueled the public protest of such courage. Because if you protest on the streets of an Iranian town, the chances are that you're dead by the following evening. And the disruption that that causes to family life and to the general life of the community is just horrible. I also know that the Iranian government is a state actor, day by day, hour by hour, damaging the national security of the United Kingdom with determination. Yeah, they're listening to what we're saying in here, of course they are. They know every word that's being said in here, and they use it in a way that is inescapably horrible. And I wish you well. I will be back with you the next time. I'm sorry we've got 7 votes, one after the other, in the House of Lords this evening, which I'm trying to participate in, so please forgive me for leaving in a moment. But I wish you well, and once again, it's a delight to see you, madam, on our screen in room 1, which is the old Supreme Court of the United Kingdom.
Exactly.